Hi, boys and girls. Today we're going to continue with If You Live with the Cherokee, but first let's review our words. We have settlers, people who move to a new area, warrior, someone who helps protect their people from enemies, symbols, something that stands for something, celebrate, a way to show that you have fun or you think something's important or you're excited about something, and then recreation, what you do for fun. We have a recreation department. That's where kids can play basketball, play football, play softball, and baseball. Recreation is what you do for fun. All right. If You Lived with the Cherokee by Peter and Connie Roop. What games did you play? Boys enjoyed a game called hawk fighting. To play, two boys crouched down facing each other. Each boy put his knees under his chin and then grabbed his legs with his arms so he looked like a ball. A friend put a long stick under his arms and knees. Each player tried to tip his opponent over. The first to get tipped over was the loser. Chunky was another favorite game for boys. To play, a stone disc was rolled across a flat field. The players, armed with spears, chased the disc. The players threw their spears at the stone. When the stone stopped rolling, the player whose spear was closest got 2 points. You needed 100 points to win. This game was not only fun, but it taught the boys how to throw spears better. The basket game was a favorite game for children. 6 white beans and a basket were needed. Each bean had been burned on one side and left white on the other. The 6 beans were tossed in the air and caught in the basket. If all the beans landed on the white side up, you got 3 points. The basket game was enjoyed during long winter nights. And here's a picture of them playing the spear game. And here's a picture of the basket game. Listening to stories was a favorite activity. Your parents and grandparents would tell you funny stories and serious stories. They would tell many animal stories, such as how the wildcat caught the gobbler, or why the possum's tail is bare, or how the deer got his horns. They would tell tales of how the world began and how the Cherokee got fire. Many of the stories had lessons that would help you be a better person or teach you to be a better warrior. Stories about the little people were taken very seriously. The little people stood 3 feet tall. They spoke Cherokee and lived in the woods whenever the Cherokee lived. The little people liked to play tricks. If an object such as a spear or a knife was found in the forest, the Cherokee believed it belonged to the little people. It was said that if you saw a little person and told about it, you would die soon. That sounds scary. Were there any team sports? Anesta, or stickball, was a major Cherokee sport. Long ago, stickball games were frequently used in place of combat with an enemy. The men from 2 opposing tribes played the game in the square in front of their cheering families and friends. Sometimes 50 men were on a team. Using short sticks with small baskets at one end, the players tried to hurl a small deer-high ball past their opponent's goalpost. The first team to score 12 goals won. Stickball was rough and tumble. The opposing players hit, kicked, pushed, and sometimes even killed one another to stop points from being scored. Stickball was called the little brother of war. The losing team frequently lost huge areas of land to the winning team. For fun, men and women, boys and girls played a game like stickball. The females played against the males, each side trying to hit a pole with a ball. The men and boys could only throw the ball with sticks. The women and girls could use their hands to throw the ball at the goal. Afterward, a feast and a dance celebrated the fun of this friendly game. The modern game of lacrosse came from stickball. Today, stickball remains an important Cherokee social and religious event. And here's a picture of them playing stickball. What happened to the Cherokee when the United States was formed? After 1783, the United States government wanted the Cherokee and other tribes to live the way other Americans did. The Cherokee were supposed to become farmers, to own land, to learn to read and write and speak English. Many of the Cherokee did. The men learned to become farmers instead of hunters. They owned cows, pigs, horses, and sheep. They rode in wagons. Instead of cutting wood with axes, they took logs to Cherokee sawmills. They owned stores, ferries, and blacksmith shops. Some wealthy Cherokee even owned black slaves like some of the white farmers did. The Cherokee women learned to spin wool instead of tanning deerskins for clothes. Cherokee children went to Christian church schools. The Cherokee began a new kind of government. They wrote a Cherokee Constitution modeled on the Constitution of the United States, which was adopted in 1781. They elected men to a national council which made laws. And here's a picture of them. And so they're trying really hard to live the way the settlers lived. They had a Cherokee police force called the Light Horse Guard. They created the first Native American free public school system, which all Cherokee children had to attend. But not all Cherokee liked to see the old ways disappear. They wanted their children to remember the ways of their ancestors. Many of the Cherokee moved deeper into the mountains to avoid contact with white Americans. What was the Trail of Tears? In 1838, the Cherokee were told by the United States government to move west of the Mississippi to the Indian Territory, part of present-day Oklahoma. New settlers wanted more Cherokee lands, especially after gold had been discovered on them. When the Cherokee refused to move, the United States sent 7,000 soldiers to force them out. The soldiers dragged families from their homes, not giving them time to gather their belongings. The Cherokee stood helplessly, watching as new settlers took over their homes. They were then forced to live in a special fenced camps where many died from filthy conditions. This is a sad part of their history. You see, new settlers are just taking their houses and forcing them out. They don't even have any of their stuff. The many treaties the Cherokee signed with the United States should have protected them, but the treaties were ignored. The Cherokee took their case to the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in America. There, they won the right to keep their lands. But then a new law was passed to move the Cherokee to the Indian Territory anyway. The Cherokee had to leave their homeland. 8,000 Cherokee went by boat down the Tennessee River to Ohio. From the Ohio River, they went down the Mississippi and finally up the Arkansas River to Indian Territory. The 17,000 Cherokees still left in the camps began the long march to Indian Territory. With them, they carried coals from their sacred fire. Some of the men, women, and children began marching in June. The rest left in fall and winter. Some rode on horses, others in wagons. Most walked. The Cherokee were hungry and thirsty. Many got sick and died from measles, whooping cough, and other diseases. The dead were buried in shallow graves along the trail. Here they are walking. Heads down, the Cherokee marched west. Through the freezing winter they marched. Few had warm clothes. Food was hard to find. Many more Cherokee died. They marched through Tennessee and Kentucky. They crossed part of Illinois. They crossed the icy Mississippi River. They kept going through Missouri and a corner of Arkansas. Finally, they reached Indian Territory. The terrible journey lasted 6 months. 1 out of every 4 Cherokee who started the march did not finish it. Over 4,000 Cherokee died along the trail. The Cherokee called the trail Nunna do Onsaya, or the place where they cried. It is also known as the Trail of Tears. Not all of the Cherokee went west that year. Many Cherokee hid in the mountains until the soldiers were gone. There they lived much as their ancestors had, hunting, trapping, fishing, and farming. Today they are called the Eastern Band. They live in the Qualla Boundary or the reservation in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, the heart of ancient Cherokee country. And here's a picture of them on the trail. What is it like to be a Cherokee today? The Cherokee who reached the end of the Trail of Tears began new lives. They built new homes, farms, and schools. They built the town of Tahlequah. Today, Tahlequah in Cherokee County, Oklahoma, is the capital of the Cherokee Nation. Here, the Cherokee government meets. The leaders of the Cherokee Nation is a chief elected by the Cherokee people. The chief works with a council of 15 members to make decisions for the Cherokee, just as the councils did long ago. A woman or a man can be elected chief. In 1985, Wilma Mankiller was elected the first woman chief of the Cherokee. Many of the streets in Tahlequah are named for Native American tribes. You can walk down Cherokee Avenue, Delaware Street, Shawnee Street, Chickasaw Street, and Choctaw Street. Many of the streets have Cherokee names such as Kitawa. The signs are in Cherokee and English. And here's a picture of it. There are 186,000 Cherokee living today. They are the second largest group of Native Americans in the United States after the Navajo. About 11,000 Cherokee, the Eastern Band, still live on a tiny part of the same land where their ancestors lived in the Great Smoky Mountains. Most Cherokee live in Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. Both bands of the Cherokee have their own schools and businesses. Many Eastern Cherokee make a living using the old Cherokee skills of basket making, carving, and beadwork to create things to sell to tourists. Others work in local businesses or on farms. Many Western Cherokee farm or work in factories making everything from rocket parts to cabinets. Both bands of the Cherokee are proud of their Cherokee heritage. Each has a museum telling the story of its band, as well as a Cherokee village built in the same way as the villages of their ancestors. Both perform summer plays telling their history. The Eastern Cherokee perform Unto These Hills, and the Western Cherokee perform Trail of Tears. Both Cherokee bands work hard to make a good life for themselves and their children. As in the days long past, they work together to take care of each other and to help one another. And here's a picture in one of the museums. All right. In 1984 was the first reunion of the Eastern and Western Cherokee since 1838. 30,000 Cherokees celebrated their traditions and culture. Coals from the sacred fire were carried west along the Trail of Tears, were mixed with coals from the Qualla boundary. A new sacred fire was lit from these coals, a fire that will burn as long as the principal people walk the earth. And that's the end of our story. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the Cherokee. Thanks for listening.